Welcome to the Days of Noah podcast, where we talk all things historical, biblical, and strange. We're trying to unpack the supernatural, how it connects to history, the present, and the future. So we really just want to dive into that journey of how do we understand the context of what we see around us, what happened in the past, and how it connects to the future. Jesus said, "As in the days of Noah, so shall it be again when I come back." And that's what we want to understand. So enjoy. And I have a coworker from work that sent me a long email with a bunch of Bible references, and I'm methodically going through and working through those things.
And what was that in reference to?
Like Genesis 6 giants and so on. So, okay. and some of the things...
Was he of the belief for or against?
He's against, which is surprising to me, because he and I are on the same page on a lot of like alternative views of the world, conspiracy things. So I was kind of surprised, and I'm like, well, I was thinking about it this week. Maybe somewhere along the line, he was taught, this idea. And actually, he didn't bring up Seth or anything. He was basically trying to dismantle the idea about angels doing this and so on. So I haven't even got into, okay, well then what does it say if it doesn't say angels, right?
Right. So, Dr. Laura Sangler, in her Roots of the Federal Reserve book, she's got a good section in here. It's actually chapter 7. She didn't start off with that. The origins of the Nephilim. So she digs into it pretty deep. So she's got a section. I'd like to compare notes on what your coworker was scripturally trying to prove against, whereas she's got scripturally showing for.
Right.
Which would be a good reference.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. One thing that I came across, I think it was from Dante Fortson. I really should make note when I find these things out, because I've been listening to Michael Heiser on YouTube, some of Dante's stuff. I just found a really good, and I think it's like 9 years old, 2-hour presentation from Doug Hamp that goes through a lot of good details about what we're talking about.
Not familiar with him.
Douglas Hamp. He was one of the.
I don't think I've heard
him. Maybe you haven't heard the episode yet. He's been on Blurry Creatures.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm still a little behind. I think I'm in the 60s.
Oh, okay. If I remember right, his book is called Corrupting the Image or something like that. But he's right in line with Marzulli and Heiser and so on. So, yeah, I forget where I hear these sources, but the good news is I remembered the key point. So you're going to find that's kind of fascinating. So, in the New Testament, the word for demons, and Jesus uses it, unclean spirit, right? So that's a pretty familiar term. And, again, if you're coming from the view that demons are fallen angels, you might kind of just gloss over that and go, whatever, I know what it means. Here's what's interesting. So the Strong's Concordance, which, are you familiar with the Strong's lexicon of language? Okay. So they're...
Yeah, give you the Greek and Hebrew root word meaning.
Exactly. So the word for unclean there is... Strong's, let's see here, 169, I think, is the number.
And this was the Strong's definition, so going back to the roots of which word?
Of unclean.
Unclean.
So, actually, let me click this link. No, I'm sorry. The Strong's number is 2513, if someone wants to look it up. Okay, so the word is katharos. I'm sorry. That's for the word clean. All right, hold on. That's the antonym. So they give what the word is, and then they give the antonym. Okay. So anyway, unclean or impure. So this is kind of fascinating. An adjective derived from not clean, not katharos. So akathartos, is unclean, and katharos is clean. So derived from not clean or purged properly, and then says not pure, and then in parentheses, because mixed, i.e., adulterated with a wrong mix, and hence unclean. And then says because tainted by sin. And then the antonym, katharo, clean, means free from wrong mixture. So if we think about what we're saying and what Enoch says and other sources are saying, the source of where did demons come from, we're saying they're not angels. There's something separate. And the origin of this word unclean literally means something not mixed, unclean is mixed or adulterated. You know, and maybe a way to picture this, if you were in a lab setting and you were doing a test and it called for you to use, a solvent like acetone, let's say, right? And you were supposed to have pure acetone, and then you were going to maybe put a chemical into that and do a test. If you had contaminants, or if you had other solvents or other debris in that acetone, that would be an impure mixture, right? It would be adulterated. It would be contaminated.
Yeah. And I think they use percentages and stuff. So if it's 100% pure, and obviously you want it to be as pure as possible.
Yeah, or whatever the test calls for.
For the integrity of the test.
Exactly. So we're talking about the origin of demons, and where is it coming from? A mixture of human DNA and angelic, and so that's a mixture.
You might be leading to this when you said mixture. The first thing that popped into my head was the image Daniel received of the statue.
Oh, sure, like the clay and iron was the bottom,
and then when he got to the foot, it talked about the clay and iron, that they would not cleave, they would not mix properly.
Interesting. Yeah. So I've heard that mention that very well could be, clay would make total sense with how Genesis says, man was made from the dust of the earth, or from the clay, from the ground. And then iron could be angels, possibly. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
That is speculation.
That, the word speaks directly to something impure because of mixture. And it makes total sense, lines up completely with the origin from angels mating with humans, and the alternative being that they're just fallen angels like Satan. There is no mixture other than, because tainted by sin, that would fit. But in terms of it being described as impure, adulterated, or mixed, that would not fit. And I think, I've heard Chuck Missler quoted on this, and Doug Hamp said this as well, that the more literal you take the Bible, the more things just open up and become so much more clear.
And even if you're a skeptic, because and I'm not saying skeptic like an unbeliever, skeptic on whether to treat it literally or not. I know many people that don't take certain parts of the scripture as literal, and they think it's figurative or imagery or whatever, or that already happened and that type of thing. I think if you were to take science as an example of how they test hypothesis, they'll look at one avenue, they'll look at another avenue, and they'll compare the evidence and come to a conclusion. And I think if someone is properly studying the word, you should look at it literal and you should look at it the other. So I definitely welcome your coworkers' thoughts and love to look at the scriptures on how he's rebuttaling some of
Yeah,
this.
absolutely.
But everyone should look at it literal to at least exhaust that line of thinking.
Right. So unless you get something really clear in the text that says, okay, I'm not even going to start with literal. Okay. But otherwise, yes, start there and work your way towards metaphorical or allegorical if you've, like you said, exhausted looking at the literal. Because, you know, this is, I think, you know, how Mike Heiser talks about thinking of how a Jewish person 2,000 years ago would have thought about these things. We're so used to a culture of Hollywood and, you know, everything, the meaning of things is lost because we've derived everything we come up with creatively. And then we, you know, spin that off into books and movies and TV shows and cartoons and all this creativity. But if you go back through human history, where sure you're going to have some fiction writing, I'm sure, but by and large, you know, life was much more serious. You know, living and dying was much more a reality. You know, we're pretty safe in our modern way of living. So it's, I don't know if you've ever heard that saying about, I don't know if it's a saying or not, but basically, like if a country was in wartime, you don't really have many poets, right? So you're kind of too busy dealing with life and death to be writing poetry and fiction and things like that.
It's funny you say that because as a family, we're going through the Bible. And so we read a section in Old Testament, and I started in Psalms and moving towards the end of the Old Testament, and then also the Gospels, the New Testament. But it's funny you say that because a lot of the poetry, music that was written by King David was during a time of war, during a time of high stress, and he was fearful for his life, and they were prayers put to music unto the Lord.
Sure. But in that sense it was.
But I hear what.
But
you're
in that
saying.
sense it was, like a prayer or a lament towards God, and you know, showing that he still had faith. So yes, so he's obviously using his creative ability, but he's not. It's not derived of meaning, right? It's not just, you know, just for fun that he's writing this stuff. So I just kind of.
Yeah, it's not leisure time.
Yeah, it's not leisure time, right? So thinking about it that way, like the stuff that they're talking about is much more likely to be about really important stuff, and things in our day, we've lost so much of the meaning of words and activities that we do. It's so far removed that it's really easy, I think, for us as a culture to think of it as, oh, that's just made up, you know, that's just somebody being creative, writing a story or whatever. So I can go through a couple of the things that he was talking about, because I think it's really beneficial to go through. And some of the things I hadn't even heard of that idea. So one of the first things he brought up was about in Enoch talking about the height of the giants. And if you go with the 300 L's, which are supposed to be like 1.5 feet per L, then you'd have a 450-foot giant. And then I can't remember who I heard this from, but there's some idea that there was like a 0 purposely left off in certain texts. I don't have the origin for that. But actually, I think that was on a Blurry Creatures episode, because there was a guest that was talking about like this could have been, you know, literally like a 4,500 foot giant. I don't know if that's
they've had quite a
not,
spectrum of viewpoints on that show. I remember one guest was like, they definitely weren't any taller than 8 feet. That was like his cap.
Yeah, that was.
So I think
right. I think that was
the
Fritz.
size is not something that we should really focus on.
No, not at all.
Especially
not at all.
when you're talking about that size. It's more. I think the most important aspect is what we talked about in the beginning here, with your definition of an evil spirit, the mixture, the DNA root of. They weren't pure. These individuals were not pure, regardless of what their size are. Because as we look today, and I'm not trying to go down a rabbit hole, Nephilim continue today, but it's different. There's still mixture, and there's plenty of evidence in the world that our human scientists are dabbling with genetics and creating mixture. So that's, I think, where our focus should mainly be. But I'll let you continue your point.
No, and he wasn't trying to say, like, try to disprove it just because of this size, but he was kind of starting there and saying, okay, according to the book of Enoch, they were 450 feet. And then he uses the verse, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. I think he put Colossians 2:8, if that's the right reference. And then, so he's saying, look, that story in Enoch, it's just a tradition told through men.
Not literal.
And, yeah. And then he references Matthew, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. So let's go through that one, because, and we've talked about it some, but yeah, so that's obviously regarding marriage. It's regarding in heaven. And what we're saying is this act didn't involve marriage so much as it involved procreation, and it didn't happen in heaven, it happened on earth.
Well, it does say that in Genesis 6 they married, did it not?
They took wives.
They took wives.
Yes.
So it wasn't like they were just, it seemed in the traditional sense of when there's a marriage contract between one family and another, or one individual and a family, usually there's a gift that is given to, say, the father and the mother, hey, I want to marry, what do they call that?
A dowry.
And there's evidence that took place, that, hey, I want to marry your daughter. In exchange for your daughter, I'm going to give you this. And there was an exchange of knowledge and things.
So since he started out talking about Enoch, so then my response to him was, okay, it's not biblical canon necessarily, but it's a historical reference. And, I think we both agree that I was saying to him, I think you and I both agree we use the Bible as our litmus test, and we compare anything to that. And one of the thoughts I had about that the last week or two is, if there's anything that conflicts in books like Enoch or Jubilees or Jasher, if there's anything that conflicts with the Bible openly, then we can likely disregard it. As long as we're understanding it correctly, we can disregard it. But I think a lot of it is not in conflict with the Bible so much as it is expanding on, right?
I would agree with
background.
That. It would give more details on the Hebrew term Nephilim, Genesis 6,
right.
Giants.
Yep. And to that point, a lot of people will say, hey, if this is such a big deal about angels doing this, why does it go on to say, and God was grieved about making man, and, he's going to deal with man? And I was thinking about that this morning. I think, if Moses wrote Genesis, okay, he's thinking about the context of this story and how his readers would understand it. he's not worried about retelling this whole story, because biblically the story is about humankind. So that's the central focus. And if books, well, I was about to say books like Enoch, but I'm learning that's probably written around the 3rd century BC, so it would have been much after Moses. But if that story was understood,
it's interesting you said that, and I'm not to interject and drop track. I've heard my pastor say it the other Sunday in reference to Job, the oldest book of the Bible. So if Job predates the 5 books of the Bible that Moses wrote, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy,
the Pentateuch. Mm-hmm.
How early would Job have been written? Is it possible that Enoch, I'm just throwing this out there, I have no evidence. Is it possible that Enoch had a revelation of Job, wrote the story of Genesis 6 in the book of Enoch, and then also wrote Job? I don't know. I don't know who wrote it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question.
On that.
Yep. So then I go on to say, Enoch and Jubilees both confirm the Genesis 6 narrative of the Bible and add much more detail and context to the story that Moses does not provide, likely because it was already understood by his readers, and as I'm proposing, that it's about mankind, and so the way he wrote it was sticking to the story of humankind. He didn't need to elaborate on that. And then I mention about Jude and Peter that we've talked about, referencing those offenses in Genesis 6. And I really think the more I look at those, there's really no way you can explain those references as being, angels that sinned with Lucifer, right, in the rebellion. Because the language, reserved in chains under darkness, Mike Heiser says that's taken directly from Mesopotamian writings, which is what Enoch used as well. Okay, so it's using language that Enoch used. There's no reference to that anywhere in the Bible about angels being in chains or in darkness. So they would have had to get that from somewhere. They would have had to, the readers would have understood what that was talking about. And do you remember when Dad was on the call a few weeks ago and he said, well, what if it's just, kind of the Holy Spirit giving revelation to something people didn't know about, and then they wrote about it? But I think we have to remember, these things were not written for posterity. They weren't written going, what is someone in 2022 going to think about this, right? They wrote to their contemporaries. So if they're not going to elaborate on it, they have to know their audience and know that their audience is going to understand these terms. And so they would have been very familiar with Enoch and Jubilees and these other writings, which again, those were found in Qumran and with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So obviously, whoever the scribes were that took the time to write those down, along with the other Old Testament fragments that were found there, they would have known that they were important enough to include, and not just write them off. So I think, I'll just go on, 'cause I'm kind of just reading my email response to him. It's important to ask, where did they get this imagery of being in chains and darkness? They would have had to have the readers understood this context. Oh, another thing too is, how in Job it says, God asked Satan, "Where have you been?" He's like, "Yeah, I've been going back and forth in the earth." So Doug Hamp makes this point. So he's arguably the most evil of all angels, and he's not chained up in darkness. That's some of the things that he addressed, and then I started a draft of because one of the things he brought up is I believe it's the King James in Numbers. It's either 13 or 14. I think it's chapter 14, verse 36.
That would be the report of the spies.
Correct. So it uses the word slander in the King James, and so he's making the point that they were telling a lie about these giants and that they look like grasshoppers in their eyes, and that's why it was an evil report, because this is slander. And what's interesting is that there are other places in Numbers 13 and 14 that describe the report, and it doesn't use the word slander. It uses evil report or a bad report. And if you look at the other translations of the Bible, like, slander is only used in the King James. So,
that's where we should use the Strong's
right,
or something to get the root of it.
Yep.
Because a lot of things get misinterpreted there isn't contradictions. There's bad interpretation or translations.
Right.
Which reference 13 and what?
So let's go to...
Because there is no 1336.
Yeah, that must be 1436. So let's go back to 13. So 13:22, and they ascended by the south and came unto Hebron, where the Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were there. So there's a reference to children of Anak that we have other scripture that says those were known to be containing Nephilim or giants. And then in 26, they went and came to Moses, to Aaron, brought back word to them about the fruit of the land. They're saying the land is good, it flows with milk and honey. Nevertheless, the people be strong, and the cities walled and are very great. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. So, moreover, they're saying, okay, children of Anak, they're saying, if you said moreover, like if I'm telling you, hey man, I went to this restaurant and it had this and that, and I said, moreover, they had this, I'm kind of saying that stands out, right, when I use that term. So they're saying children of Anak, that stood out as a big deal.
There's an emphasis.
Yeah. Now, if you look up the Strong's, it's 1681 for slander in the next chapter.
Where is slander found?
I think it's 1436.
Now I'm looking at the New King James, 1436.
Yeah, it wouldn't be in New King James; it would be in the original.
Yeah, so I'm looking at purposely on a different translation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I believe it's 1436. But the word means whispering, defamation, evil report. So defamation could be interpreted as a lie. But one of the definitions...
That doesn't seem accurate to me.
No,
you had 12 spies. You have two people that were full of faith. It was a positive report because it confirmed the land was exactly what God said it was, a land flowing with milk and honey. It was a rich land. We need to go there because this is an awesome place to go. And the 10 that were fearful, lacking faith, gave a bad report or an evil report because they were scared. They did not want to go.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It wasn't that they lied, it's that they were scared to go. So the richness of it. So New King James says brought an evil report.
An evil report. Yeah. So just going through that Strong's definition, the third one is evil report or unfavorable saying. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean a lie or defamation. So he's kind of taking it to mean that that's what it means, but it could also mean what we're saying, evil report. Now, there's other reasons to suggest that it was not a lie.
Well,
okay.
Well, here's one reason why I would say it's not a lie. God did not God did not bring judgment, and He wasn't angry because of a lie. He was angry because they weren't full of faith, trusting that He can overcome this enemy. When He's demonstrated for the last few weeks, or whatever the time period was, because they made up something. No, He judged them because they were scared and not trusting Him.
Yeah, the judgment was...
That's my take.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, that the judgment was against lack of faith. But there's other things in context that really make it difficult to believe that they were telling a lie. And I'll go through that. So, verse 29, I apologize if I'm not sure if this is in 13 or 14 because I copied and pasted the verses. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and we talked about that last time. That the root
That's
of that
13.
Amalekites means blood lickers.
Okay.
And the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea. So all of these tribes, there's mention in the Bible about those containing giants.
Yep,
and then,
surrounding the promised land, the promised land.
Yep, and then Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it." So right there is an opportunity for Caleb to correct the report and say, no. Yeah, they got walls, there's a lot of people there. But he could have corrected them about what type of people were there. And,
that's a good point.
And he doesn't. But then in response...
He doesn't correct the accuracy of the report.
Right.
He corrects their motivation.
Yeah. Should we or shouldn't we go
their
in
lack
and take
of
it?
motivation.
Yep. And then, but then the other 10 spies rebut him and give more detail. Okay. We are not able to go against the people. They're stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, "The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people we saw in it are men of a great stature. And there we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." So they're elaborating on the report and saying, look, let me tell you...
More detail.
Yeah, how scary it was. So one thing, too, is it's saying they brought the report. They give this information. That they could have included Joshua and Caleb as far as the details of the tribes. It doesn't really tell us that it was the 10 spies that were the ones describing it, although it does suggest that in terms of rebutting.
Where are you talking about the they?
Well, just in this whole section about they saw this and they told him, we came to a land floweth with milk and honey.
Okay, so verse 32, and they gave the children of Israel a bad report.
Yeah.
The they in that context, I would lump together the 10 besides Joshua and Caleb.
Yes, and that makes sense because we hear, so right now Caleb's the only one that has rebutted it, and later Joshua will, but
correct.
I would agree with that.
Scripture.
Okay. So furthermore, we see Joshua and Caleb address the Israelites in the next chapter that they were so afraid they wanted to go back to Egypt, even if it meant being slaves again. If the 10 evil spies were lying, why didn't Joshua and Caleb correct them when they addressed their fellow Israelites? So here in 14 it says, "And Joshua son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel." So they're addressing all of Israel in response to the bad report that said, this is how dangerous it is. The land which we passed through to search it, so I'm in verse 7, is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them. The Lord is with us, fear them not. So, even this makes the point even stronger, because now the evil spies have elaborated on this report, stating clearly, look, they're giants. This land devours itself. This is an exceedingly dangerous place, and we're like grasshoppers to them. And here you have Joshua addressing the whole company of Israel, and there's no correction to that. You know, you'd think if that is the time, that would be the time to set the record straight. And he doesn't. He says, he doesn't dispute it at all. He simply goes to, doesn't matter, we can take it. God's with us. Their defense has departed from them.
Yeah, so that's evidence that it wasn't a lie. That what they were saying about the walls, about their statue, about their character, was all accurate information. It was just one was full of faith, one was not. One was fearful, one was saying we can do this.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so again, we only see slander in that one interpretation, or I'm sorry, one translation, and we see bad report or evil report in everything else. The NIV, the NLT, ESV, Berean Standard Bible, New King James. I mean, and again, it's only in that one verse, and all the context shows that they didn't dispute the report. They disputed whether they could take it or not. So that's kind of what I'm working through. And then one of the other things, yeah, go ahead.
Scriptures that I look at in the thinking that there definitely was angels who did this act in Genesis 6 was the definition of sons of God. Did he talk about in his scripture, does he make reference to that at all?
Yes, he does, and that's
he doesn't agree with it.
Yep, that's an excellent segue, because that's one of the next things that I'm writing back to him. So he is assuming that fallen angels are a Greek mythology. Well, let me get to that in a minute. He brought up a kind of a interesting point that I had never heard. He says God created good angels and evil angels, and they all work for him. So he's saying that there are no such thing as fallen angels, but there's good and evil ones, and he uses them as he sees fit. And he points to verses like Psalm 78:49. He cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation and trouble by sending evil angels among them. And Ecclesiastes 39:28, there be spirits that are created for vengeance, which in their fury lay on sore strokes. In the time of destruction they pour out their force, and appease the wrath of him that made them. And we could think of even the Passover angel, right? The angel of death coming through. Whether that's an angel in his employ, God's employ, or not, but this idea that there's no really such thing as a fallen angel. And I'll just be blunt, it didn't take me long to dispute that. So we go to...
Yeah, that one's pretty easy to dispute.
Yeah, go ahead, and I'll kind of unpack that.
Well, I mean, those scriptures are valid and they need to be discussed, but it doesn't address the creation. All it talks about is how God uses spirits.
Right. Yeah. No, so I'll get into that in a bit.
So if God created these angels, he doesn't agree that some fell, but I would argue there was a portion that fell. So you have some that are still in service to God that are going to obey his commands, and then others that have the characteristics, they're just going to do whatever they want. God can use both sets of angels for his purpose.
Sure. Yep.
So there is the thinking that if there's a hedge of protection over us, like there was around Job, the enemy cannot touch him. But if God lifts his hand of protection, it's not that God's going to send one of his obedient holy angels to smite him. He's just removed his protection. So those evil spirits that in their character want to steal, kill, and destroy now have an opportunity to do what they want to do.
Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction. Yeah.
And then obviously we live in a fallen world. We live in a world where if you choose something, you're opening yourself up to the enemy for whatever you open yourself up to. And so you look at the death angel in Egypt, I don't think it was, and I could be wrong, I don't think it was like Michael, the archangel, the warring angel. I don't think it was Michael per se that went to kill, though he could have been commanded that way. It could be God's hands of protection came off. The evil spirits came in that are thirsty of blood. And either way, it was God kind of orchestrating what is allowed, what is not allowed.
I think that's a really good point because, you have that example in Job. Satan, God sets the parameters for how he's able to touch Job and what he can and can't do. So we have a precedent for that very likely could have been the case with the angel of death, to say, okay, you go do this, but it's only on the firstborn and it's only on the ones that don't have the blood on the doorposts, right? So he probably sets the parameters. But, I know it doesn't address the sons of God issue, but I'm going to get to that. But I wanted to just touch on this because he did bring it up. And so if there's no fallen angels and they all work for God, then there'd be no angels that sin. And then we would have a problem with Jude and Peter, right? Because it's the angels that sinned. So
we have a problem with a lot of.
You'd have a problem with Satan himself, right? He's not fallen. Yeah. So he simply does God's work.
So God creates evil angels for his purpose, then creates a judgment for those angels called the lake of fire.
Yeah.
Because he just wants to create something to destroy it?
Yeah, no. Right. No, it really falls apart pretty quick. Okay, so angels, the sons of God. Here we go. So, let's see here. Okay, so he references...
And I understand he's not here to defend himself, but we're using his, just trying to keep to what he's...
Yeah, I'm going off the email and the scriptures that he references, and many of them we've used. So Job 38:7, when the morning stars sang and the sons of God shouted for joy at the creation, right? So he's calling that metaphorical. So he's saying, look, morning star, how do they sing? Well, morning stars are actual stars, and he says the sons of God are stars, moon, and sun. And how do they sing? Well, they're shining their light. And so he's saying it's all metaphorical. And so my response is, so if sons of God are metaphorical in Job 38, that as sun, moon, and stars, how does sun, moon, and stars take wives and have children in Genesis 6? Because we have the exact same phrase, Benai Elohim, or Bain Elohim. There's different ways to say it. So that makes no sense whatsoever, because we're taking the exact same term.
I think what it's referencing, and I think you would agree with me, is that the characteristic of these angelic ones, these spirits that God created, were so beautiful that they shone like stars. They had characteristics that were similar.
Yeah, that's possible. And there's some talk in some of the guests on Blurry Creatures about angelic beings having a luminescence to them. So there may be a literal sense of that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Even Lucifer was, I forget which scripture, it might have been Ezekiel or something.
Well, the name itself, light bearer.
Yes, the light bearer. It was described as, and I don't have the scriptural reference for it, but yeah, the light bearer, the illumination of his countenance, even built-in music, like, he had characteristics inside of him to create music. So there was, some amazing attributes that were built into their character.
And we can't forget too that the Bible does allude to stars as being angels. In Revelation 12:4, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, which did cast them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman, ready to be delivered to devour her child. So there's instances where, I'll go on. Revelation 1:20, the mystery of the 7 stars which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches.
And that's Revelation what?
1:20. So there's description of stars actually being angels. And that may be literal, that the actual lights we see up in the sky are angels. So I think you can use those interchangeably, but if you took them as only what an astronomical interpretation of a star is, well, that doesn't work for Genesis 6. If you have a star having children with human women, I think that'd be a bigger stretch than an angel coming down to earth to have a baby with a human woman, to have a fireball of burning gas coming down and having a baby. So that really doesn't work, because again, it's the exact same Hebrew phrase. So I don't think we can call that a metaphor to use that. So, and he lists some other verses, like God being called the Father of lights. Every good and perfect gift is from above and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness, no shadow of turning. Okay, that's kind of poetic language, but it's also literal. If stars are angels and give light, then he's literally the Father of lights.
Well, and Michael Heiser, and I see if I can find some of his reference. And he talks about this in his book, The Unseen Realm. As we see in Psalm 82, that the Most High calls the sons of God, or the sons of the Most High, gods. This is astounding for people who do not have a supernatural worldview. The supreme Elohim, Yahweh, created other Elohim, which became his sons, benign Elohim. The gods were created with the purpose of defending the weak and the fatherless, to uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, to rescue the weak and the needy. But the gods were rebellious sons, and instead of fulfilling their role, they defended the unjust, showed partiality to the wicked, and walked about in darkness. Therefore the Almighty Elohim rendered a judgment. The gods would die like mere mortals. In contrast to the rescue plan for humanity, the Almighty Elohim provided no rescue plan for the rebellious Elohim. They are spiritual beings, and the rebellion was treasonous. Samuel defines the root of rebellion when explaining to Saul while he lost his kingship. that was in part what I wanted to share, but it's definitely interesting when you look at the language of sons of God, that they were benign Elohim, and then Yahweh is looked at as God, Elohim. You know, he's like, and there in the English translation, you have Jesus being described as King, capital K, of kings, lowercase k, Lord, capital L, of lords, lowercase l. So there is an order that he created, and he rules over it. And there was, I don't know, I think there's enough evidence to suggest that there was a rebellion, and there wasn't just he created good angels and created bad angels. No, he created everything the way he wanted it, and there's free will that's written into our ability, even the angelic.
Yeah.
And some chose to rebel.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem to fit better. And I mean, going back to Genesis 6:4, you have sons of God contrasted with daughters of men. So if we are talking about humans and humans, it's really difficult to understand why you would use a phrase that's talking about Elohim, and then in the very same sentence talk about a phrase to do with humankind, when what you really meant is both humankind. You know, it's really a stretch. And I'm finding more nuggets as to how this Sons of Seth view came in. You know, Doug Hamp says that basically all the church fathers before the Nicene Creed came up with, I think, in the 3rd or 4th century. So they're called the Anta, meaning before Nicene time period, between like 100 AD and 300 and something AD. They all understood this to mean angels. And, you know, you have the Catholic Church under penalty of death. This interpretation was not allowed to teach that this was angels. And then you have
that's interesting.
You know, the Julius Africanus kind of floated the idea, but he didn't really believe it necessarily. But he said, "What if it's the sons of Seth?" And Augustine kind of popularized it, and it went from there. But when you have, and that's why one of the books I want to get, it's a little pricey, but it's like an academic level book that's really highly regarded. It's from Annette Yoshiko Reed, and Mike Heiser references it in one of his videos. And she wrote a book called, see if I can get the title here. Just a sec. It's Fallen Angels, and it's basically about how early Judaism and Christianity understood Enoch and this whole concept. I mean, it's right in line with what we're saying. Let me just...
yes. Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Something that Dr. Laura points out.
Fallen Angels and the History... Sorry, let me just say the title quick. Fallen Angels and the History of Judaism and Christianity. And the subtitle is... The Reception of Enoch, the Reception of Enochic Literature. And it goes through that history all the way up to medieval times of how this was understood and taught. All right, go ahead.
So like you said, how the early church and those living during those times, probably up to the 3rd century, how they viewed the ancient world, their beliefs of history. I'm going to read this part really quick. So she's kind of using Enoch, and this is her take on it. While the Bible's account of the origin of the Nephilim is only mentioned briefly in Genesis 6, we can turn to extra biblical texts as a source for more information. It's kind of like what we've already said. For example, the book of Enoch, or more accurately referred to as 1 Enoch, is a valuable resource that will uncover important clues for us. While I don't consider these extra biblical texts to have the same authority as canonized scripture, I do recognize that Peter and Jude, who are inspired biblical authors, referenced 1 Enoch to be worthy of referencing in their books. I believe this lends credibility to these extra biblical texts. 1 Enoch was written during the Second Temple era, also known as the Instrumental period, which was between 500 BC and about 70 AD. While the author is unknown, the main character is Enoch, not 1 Enoch is not surprisingly Enoch. So I think that's kind of interesting that she researched that, the time period that it was written, and especially kind of to your point, 2 authors that is in canonized scripture that God anointed as apostles or as just leaders in the church reference this extra biblical book. So that should give to us more credibility when we read it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about kind of the context of what they were talking about, how it really doesn't fit to say that they were just rebellious angels, and it fits so much the language in Enoch and Jubilees, and Mike Heiser says, which came from Mesopotamian, because I don't know a whole lot about that, but in Mesopotamian writings, there's a whole lot of these concepts are talked about.
Dr. Laura also references that. I won't get into it, but in that same section, chapter 7, the origin of Nephilim, she does talk about the Mesopotamian account, and she goes through that a little bit. And even though I'll just read the first sentence. There is an ancient Mesopotamia text that tell a story which parallels the origin of the Nephilim as Genesis 6. So it's not scripture. It's coming from not even like Enoch that is referenced. So less credibility, but yet, like you were referenced earlier, if the subject matter doesn't, if it lines up with the scripture and it doesn't contradict it, you can use that as like scientifically, or it's a confirmation of these other things. You're seeing it repeated on multiple locations around the world.
If Jude and Peter are going to use language that were from pagan Mesopotamian stories, they're confirming what's happening. And
yes,
you'd have to come up with a reason why they would use that same language and not be referring to that event that even in the Mesopotamian writings is talking about divine beings mating with humans. So yeah, I think we're really starting to build a case, based on a lot of the objections, based on the context, how people thought of it then, for these interpretations. And we haven't even got into hardly, the physical evidence. You've got 15th century explorers coming to an island and talking about being chased by giants and having to turn their cannons on them, and all of the archaeological excavations that have been done and the megaliths, and we'll get into all of that, I'm sure, in coming weeks. But just starting from scripture and related sources, building a case, and just to let, I hope, credibility to how we're understanding scripture and giving texts like Enoch credibility. If there were no physical evidence, if there was no other writings about such creatures, if we didn't have the megaliths, if we didn't have the skeletons and all the elongated skulls and all these other pieces of evidence, then we might want to give pause to how we're interpreting the Bible and giving Enoch credibility. But when they line up, we're really building that circumstantial case and saying all these things put together makes a pretty good case for,
and like you said,
what our world is.
The additional evidence outside of the Bible in the world do point back and confirm the Bible is true. It doesn't contradict. It's reinforcing. The evidence is reinforcing what the biblical narrative is. Like you said, Moses wrote it. It's a one line, one sentence. He didn't elaborate on the Nephilim or the giants. He said that they were there and they were there afterwards. But all these other examples kind of give extra information, but confirm.
Yep, they give the
what he said.
They give the framework.
They really did exist.
And really, when you think about how do we trust history? Like, we're not there. We have writings. We have archaeology. So we have to. There's a degree of faith to any history, to say that King Tut lived or something like that, right? Like, we have to take what we have, and when we take what we have, on any other historical basis, the way you'd understand any secular history or archaeology, we have more than enough evidence to say that these things occurred.
Absolutely. And I heard a minister a few weeks back talking about the historical, outside of the Bible, historical reference of that Julius Caesar lived and ruled in Rome is around 10 documents. And everybody believes it, everybody trusts it. But there is around 40 historical references to Jesus living. And I don't know if those historical documents talk about his death, burial, and resurrection, but the historical accurate, the documents do lead credence that he lived.
Right.
There was a person that lived 2,000 years ago named Jesus. And people, in Josh McDowell's book, More Than a Carpenter, he came in as an atheist. He's like, I'm going to research this thing. I'm going to look historically at who is this Jesus that lived, and I'm going to prove that he was not the Son of God. And he looked at the evidence for and against, and it came to faith. He came to faith. But to your point, I'm referencing that, like you were saying, there's historical documents out there that you can use. I told you when I went to Rome, you can do a Google search, General Titus. There is an arch in Rome. General Titus was the general who led the armies of Rome into Jerusalem in 70 AD, that destroyed the temple, took artifacts from the temple, the holy artifacts, back to Rome. And in that arch that is still standing to this day is a carving of a parade with them with a candlestick and these holy artifacts that is mentioned in the Old Testament as God commanded Moses to create and to put in the temple. So here is the second temple that was destroyed by the Romans, historical, physical. It's not written in a book. This is a literal stone arch that you could walk under and see the image that was carved in there. So it's just another piece of evidence to show that these different things in history did take place.
Yeah.
There's lots of examples. So,
yeah, no, I think that's excellent, because Lee Strobel did the same thing. If you know about The Case for Christ, The Case for Faith, The Case for the Resurrection, all those books that he wrote. And he was an atheist, married to a Christian, his wife, and as a journalist, so that was his job, set about to kind of disprove these things. And when the preponderance of evidence and the most likely explanation is something strange maybe fantastical, almost mythical, but when the evidence is pointing there, it's actually more likely that took place when your evidence points that way. And that's where Josh McDowell took it with More Than a Carpenter, and where Lee Strobel takes it. And,
we should use the same type of logic
Yep.
when it comes to researching this subject matter.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if there's a book. I'm thinking about the title, The Case for Giants. And I don't know if there's a book with that exact title. I know there's books that probably do the type of thing we're talking about. But I think that would be really fascinating to kind of gather that if it's not in like one place, kind of how Mike Heiser says, the unseen realm, no original thoughts were his. He just synthesized all of the information and put it together. And I think that's kind of a goal that I have as we're discussing, is putting all this information together. If it's not been done already, I don't know, maybe we're recreating the wheel, but I like the idea of drawing from different sources, like Doug Ham.
I'm going to bring this book with me when I come up for Thanksgiving, because I think you'll get a lot out of it, even just skimming it.
That was Laura Sanger. What was that called?
Yeah, it is, and because she did a great amount of research.
What's it called?
So this is in the section, it's called the Roots of the Federal Reserve, Tracing the Nephilim from Noah to the U.S. Dollar. So she's tying in the Genesis 6 account, what took place around the world, and how the character traits of the Nephilim continued through the centuries, even to the physical ground of Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, where the Federal Reserve was created. Was where the brainchild, where the meeting took place of these powerful leaders in secret of darkness, back in 1913, created the Federal Reserve. And they purposely use the term or the title Federal Reserve, even though it's not federal and it's not a reserve, it's not attached to the U.S. government whatsoever, because the people during that day would not accept a centralized bank to be in control, because they had tried previous years to create it and failed and failed and failed.
Jefferson fought against it.
Great reference book. I have it on Audible. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Yeah, I have that.
About
I have
the Federal
that too.
Reserve.
Yeah.
But let me read this really quick. This is under her Mesopotamian account. So obviously this is a third party, not biblical, but it kind of leads credence to what we're saying. So that the Epic of Gilgamesh, a poem that is considered one of the earliest surviving literary masterpiece. I can't talk. Yes. Literary masterpieces is another from Mesopotamian text that lends to confirmation of the presence of the Nephilim. In the Book of Giants, several times the giants are listed, and Gilgamesh is listed as the offspring of the Watchers. It tells how Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, oppresses his people. He sexually assaults the Uruk brides on their wedding night. He was said to be a third human and 2/3 divine, a hybrid like Nephilim. The epic poem depicts the relationship between Gilgamesh and another person. I can't pronounce it. The oppressed people of Uruk cry out to their God. So I don't know. It's just one after another examples of examples of stories from around the world that teach the same thing.
Yeah, that mesh with it. Real quick, does she get into the book about Tim Bentz and his trip to Jekyll Island? Because she references on the show.
I know she verbally had said it in the podcast. I don't know, because I haven't read this whole book. I've just kind of picked out different parts to look at.
Yeah, that would be interesting to go through. Find that YouTube interview with him. I think Rob Skiba might have done an interview with him where he tells that whole story. But I think that'd be really cool to look at. Thanks for listening to the Days of Noah podcast. My name is Pete. My brother Luke was on the other line, calling in from the great state of Louisiana. Join us next week. We're going to continue the discussion, trying to understand the times we're in, uncovering the past, connecting it with the present, discerning the future.